outside the United States or children of immigrants. But since one world language is not on the horizon, we will continue to need multilingual speakers. So there's a recognition of the importance of multilingual speakers, but we are not there in terms of the general population, and I'm going to be talking about that in just a bit. So the question that I asked myself and that I want to bring to you is, does everyone share the belief that knowing more than one language is useful? And the answer is, it depends. For those living in an environment where the language spoken does not go much beyond the confines of the national environment, other languages are important. And you can think of a language like Finnish, where only in Finland do they speak Finnish, so other languages are more needed. Or consider a language in Asia, perhaps like Korean, where that would be the same case. Korean is only in Korea. So in these contexts, a more widely spoken language might be useful. It doesn't matter which language, generally turns out to be English, but one needs more languages. For those living in the US, where English is our common language for almost every transaction, language learning turns out to be not so highly valued. Whatever learning takes place in a context like that of the US is done by individuals with only minimum multilingual context. People are acting as individuals, and you had talked earlier about the difference between individual learning and social learning, but they're not learning language within a social network that can happen in multilingual societies. In multilingual contexts, learning takes on a different flavor, allowing greater scaffolding, allowing greater use of the environment, providing us with the opportunity for learning to take place within a social context. And this is certainly important when we're talking not only about the language specifically, but also the culture of the environment. In the US, people who are like me, who are interested in language learning and believe that knowing another language and understanding another culture are extraordinarily important as we develop in this multicultural world. But there are other arguments that are being posed that go beyond a specific language or beyond a specific culture. And these very often relate to some of the psychological benefits of language. Understand that what those of us who are advocating for language in the US are trying to do are to convince parents and children in high school and people in the university that it's important to study language. And some of the arguments that are presented are that it helps brain growth. You'll see that these are mostly psychological benefits, delay of dementia, becoming more language sensitive, boosting one's memory, multitasking, increasing ability to multitask. It increases focused attention. One has greater focus as a benefit of studying a language. It can change the way we see the world, and a Chinese proverb states this nicely: to learn a language is to have one more window from which to look at the world, basically making us better and more tolerant individuals. And it can help us improve our understanding of our first language. In a New York Times article, there was a nice quote from, I will not pronounce the name, but this person, the collective evidence from a number of studies suggests that the bilingual experience improves the brain's so-called executive function, a command system that directs the attention processes that we use for planning, solving problems, and performing various other mentally demanding tasks. So I said it comes more from a psychological perspective than a sociological one. And And this basically, so, to sum this up, people who speak more than one language, they have improved memory, better critical thinking. The concentration is better. Multitasking is better, and better listening skills. But despite this, there is still mistrust. Where in cultures where a world dominant language is spoken, that's like the US, English is a world dominant language, many do not understand the importance of language learning and the practical value that it can have. Some still believe that knowing more than one language creates confusion, or even worse, a sort of dual personality. And it's very hard to convince people that this is not the case. So in today's world, at least where I live, you hear the question, why bother? Why do I need English? Why do I need another language? English is spoken all over the world. I'm fine. I'm not going to travel. I don't need another language. And so there's much more interest on the practical value. Let's just learn how to text message. Let's not worry about other languages. And then there's someone who does take a language course, and this is what I'm going to be talking about as I go on. The results are not impressive. Language learning is difficult, and we have not succeeded in getting students to the level where there's a lot of practical value in the language. And so I'm going to return to this point later. And now let me come to some of the definitions, and this is more of a research topic, and I'm not sure I have any answers. Sorry about that. But I do want to help understand why some of the very different literatures, in my literature, in the bilingual literature, and the multilingual literature, we don't seem to always be talking to one another in the best way possible to come up with a uniform definition. As we know, more of the world's language population is bilingual or multilingual than monolingual. So what does it mean? Now, a simple dictionary definition says that it refers to a person who is fluent in two languages. That's bilingualism. Fluent means able to express oneself easily and articulately. But different research traditions seem to be using these terms differently. We have a word, native speaker. There are many controversies, by the way, around each of these terms, and I'm not going to be able to go into them, so I'm just going to take a few because they relate to, I think, what's important in understanding different traditions of research. We have a native speaker. We have a near native speaker. We have an advanced language learner. We have a heritage language speaker. We have a second language learner. We have a second language speaker. We have a bilingual. We have multilingual. All of those are terms that you hear in the literature and nobody knows exactly what they mean or has a good definition outside of their own tradition. But when we refer to a native speaker, we are generally referring to an idealized abstraction because individuals do not have the same knowledge, even of their first language. And it depends on many factors. Some of these factors are social, level of education, or even regional. So this is an idealized construct. We have a near native speaker is often used in when people talk about ultimate attainment or the level of achievement that one can have in another language. Can a second language learner achieve native-like knowledge use of a second language? And examples often relate to pronunciation. So if you think, I don't know if you are familiar with the way Henry Kissinger speaks, beautiful English. My English should be so good. But his pronunciation is not native. So there are different ways that he is. I mean, is he a native speaker? I don't know. Is he he's not a native speaker because he wasn't born in an English-speaking country, but he speaks every bit like a native speaker, except for the pronunciation. We have advanced language speaker or advanced language user, and this is used as a technical term, which I will come back to, or is it's very often so vague when you talk about an advanced learner or advanced speaker. Very loose usages, and I'm just going to run through a couple of them that have been given as definitions of advanced. How long they've lived in a country, the international faculty using English at our campuses in the U.S. for communication. TOEFL scores greater than a certain amount. Elite people in a country like in Morocco studying to be English teachers. Graduate students in the university. Length of stay, 5 to 7 years. Length of residence, so I said that about 2 years. University enrollment, et cetera, et cetera. These are just very, very different ways that people have talked about what an advanced speaker means without any real benchmark of what we mean. But very often there's a technical usage, and this relates to this is the American Council for Teaching of Foreign Languages, and I'm going to come back to this because my own research uses this particular scale, but there's a technical usage of advanced, which is achieving a particular score on a particular test. I don't know if you're familiar with the Common European Framework of Reference. This is just another scale that has 6 levels, this has 11. What about the meaning of bilingual? Well, sort of the equivalent of native speakers in 2 languages. It's often assessed through a given linguistic measure, and it refers to someone whose language is in a steady state, who has learned and is highly proficient in 2 languages. And I include in this definition multilingualism as basically the same, but it's just that's more than 2. The second language acquisition way of looking at it is that this refers to an endpoint. Someone is bilingual. It's not commonly used within the literature that I deal with. I don't use that term unless I'm referring to a different tradition, because second language researchers have as their main interest the discovery of the process of learning. We're not so much interested in the final state. Well, to some extent we are, but we are interested in the process. But interestingly enough, and this is not a definition that I would agree with, starts out, there's an article on the foundations of bilingualism by saying everyone is bilingual. That is, there is no one in the world, no adult anyway, who does not know at least a few words and languages other than the maternal variety. If it's an English speaker, you can say c'est la vie, or gracias, or guten tag, or tovarish, or even if you only understand them, you clearly have some command of a foreign tongue. The question, of course, is one of degree. I don't agree with that, but that is certainly one definition that is out there. So I said, I'm not going to answer the question, but I'm going to hope that you will think a little bit about the non-precision of this terminology. Also, and this is more the way I think about it, Buffy talks about the process of second language acquisition, of becoming a bilingual. The end result of SLA is a bilingual speaker if one ever gets there. Valdez considers a bilingual as someone who can do everything perfectly in 2 languages and who can pass undetected among monolingual speakers of each of these 2 languages. This she refers to as the mythical bilingual. It doesn't exist. Different types of bilinguals. There are different types of bilinguals, and it's more appropriate, in my view and in the view of many, to think of bilingualism as a continuum with different amounts of knowledge, and I should add culture in here, because we also need to talk about biculturalism and multiculturalism. You can't really, I don't think you can separate the language from the culture part. different types of bilingual, so with different amounts of knowledge of the first language and the second language. It's not a state, but a process, and this is sort of where a continuum. So we're talking about bilinguals can refer to the process of learning, which is more common within my tradition of research, as well as the end result, the product of learning. But there are many gray areas. The terminology used in various literatures, as I've shown, is vague. It's sometimes contradictory and often limited to a very narrow domain. Two groups of researchers may refer to the same phenomenon by different names. Advanced language learners in the second language literature, bilinguals in the bilingual literature. So that's sort of where we are, I think, with the terminology. Again, no answers, but one needs to think to clearly define what we mean and what we are talking about. So I want to turn a little bit, go back to my own research context and talk about why people are shying away from language study. Why are we having such a problem? And I want to look at the results. And results are not always so positive after years of study. It takes a long time to reach a point where anything resembling fluency is a result. It's just a different process. And if we look at the realities, we know that increasing proficiency in a foreign language is the goal of all foreign language instructional programs, second language instructional programs. That's what we're trying to do, obviously. We frequently find ourselves asking the question why students are not doing so well even after many, many years of instruction. And I'm going to talk now about some of the research that I've done in the U.S. with regard to language programs and foreign language education. There was a commission that issued a report about 2 years ago now, where they recognized that languages are fundamental to nearly every aspect of our lives. They're not only our primary means of communication, they are basis for our judgments, for informing how we understand others and how understanding ourselves. But they also note that we have not been successful in our educational system in educating the U.S. population in languages. The English is a lingua franca for many, many, many things that we do in the world. But there is, the positive side is that some people, even businesses, are beginning to believe that proficiency in English is not sufficient to meet our nation's needs in a shrinking world. So that's the good side of it. And these are important because they attempt the arguments that we make for language are extremely important because they're what we use as we try to convince school systems to provide funding for language study, and there isn't that much funding. It is promoting in language study in the U.S. is definitely an uphill battle. We want to reach advanced literacy, and I'm talking about this in a technical term now of advanced, and we should expect this outcome for all of at least our majors in languages. But it is an uphill battle, and we're not reaching our goals. So what can we think about as some reasonable expectations? What are reasonable goals for language study? What can we expect after 4 years of language study at the university level? About 4 years ago, my colleagues and I received funding from the U.S. government to undertake a very large-scale project to understand the proficiency goals of language programs and to understand whether these goals were being met. So what did we do? We took on a very large-scale testing at Michigan State University, and 2 other universities were involved as well. We had demographic surveys on language learning experiences for most of the students. We gave them speaking, listening, and reading tests. These are official standardized tests. We did classroom observations. We asked them teachers and students, what they felt it needed to be proficient. And we asked them for what we call can-do self-assessments. How good do you think your Spanish is, or your Arabic is, or your German is, or your French is? We tested Chinese, Russian, French, and Spanish. That's what our grant allowed for. And we tested students at all levels of proficiency, this is their first year of university, second year, third year, and fourth year, and during the first semester and the second semester. As you can see, we tested a large number of students. We tested nearly 6,000 students, so we have a very, 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 very large database. So let me tell you, before I give you a little bit about the results, how these were measured. This was a standardized test. And there are 10 levels, and they go from what's called novice, slow, to superior. And these numbers are sort of numerical values that we give them. Each level has 3 different areas, low, mid, and high. So you've got novice, low, novice, high. And importantly, one has to reach this level, what we call advanced slow, which is probably, I would say, maybe a C1, if you're familiar with the Common European Framework of Reference, to be able to teach in these schools. And just to give you 2 very brief examples of what these mean, I'm sort of taking the intermediate level and the mid-level of both and the advanced. So somebody at the intermediate mid-level can participate in conversations on familiar topics. I can handle short social interactions. I can ask some questions and answer some. I can usually say what I want to say about myself and my everyday life. And you'll see this is about where they get. I can express myself fully. This is the advanced level, not only on familiar topics, but also on some concrete social, academic, and professional topics. I can handle routine situations. With an unexpected complication, I can share my point of view in discussions on these complex issues. Now let's look and see where they get, and let's just look at their 4th year of study. And this is speaking, this is listening, and this is reading. This is the advanced mid-level, just a little bit higher than that. Reading is higher. That's the only one. Speaking and listening don't even get to nowhere close to the point where they can even teach in the schools. So we wanted to know what we can expect from foreign language majors in the early 21st century. What contributes to those who, to their learning? Is it heritage status, study abroad experience, motivation? What is it that gets them to that point? So we took and looked at only those students who are in this advanced level, and we looked at, these are people who've majored in the language, so they've made a commitment to this language. And we can see we only had enough data for French and Spanish to look at this, but you can see Spanish, 22% got to an advanced level. This is where they are. 54% of French, learners of French. For listening, it's a little bit better. They get to in the 46% range of these are majors who get to the advanced level, and reading is the highest. So reading skills surpass speaking and listening skills, and that's a curricular issue, I think, because there's so much emphasis on reading. Less than half reach the advanced level of proficiency in French and Spanish. But so how can we predict proficiency outcomes? And we looked at their background questionnaires, and we took 270 majors that we had and looked at their scores. And we saw that heritage language exposure helps, study abroad experience helps, and motivation of all sorts of different types of motivation, for if you wanted to be for professional purposes, cultural knowledge, communication, going abroad, etc. The most positive predictors for reading was study abroad, language for fun, and just to complete a requirement was a negative predictor. If you wanted this, you weren't going to get very far. For listening was a little bit different. If you were a heritage language speaker, you wanted to learn language for fun or language for travel. And for speaking, it was a little bit different yet, those areas. So it's not all the same, different predictors for different skills. So as I said, reading surpasses other skills. And study abroad, heritage status, and continue to higher proficiency and attainment. So if we're going to think about teaching, we need to have a clear, because it clearly shows that we need to think a little bit more about our pedagogy and our curriculum. We need to have a clear understanding of what we can expect. We have to ensure that we set reasonable goals and assess frequently how we are meeting those goals. Sometimes we don't really know, and we have to ensure up-to-date language teaching methods and improve the intrinsic motivation, get our students excited about what we're doing. But what I want to go back to is why language learning is so difficult. Why do we have these results? After 4 years of studying physics or chemistry or math, one has a good understanding of the basics. But students only reach a level of proficiency after 4 years of language study that allows them, and this is from the intermediate mid, to talk about familiar topics and can say something about themselves in their everyday life. We're not getting further than that. And for the languages of the world, when we think about language learning and what it means to learn another language, there's so much that we have to learn: word order, meanings of prepositions, agreement, articles, so they have the verb to be, vocabulary, and orthography. I think this is one that has been underestimated when the differences in orthography are great. It's difficult because it challenges both your mind. You have to construct new cognitive frameworks, and it takes time. It requires sustained, consistent practice. But there's more to it than that. You need to learn a skill. It's not just an object. If you think of a sport, you can't learn to play soccer or play tennis or any sport by just watching it. You have to actually physically do it. You have to have sustained, regular, I would say daily practice. And we don't, certainly in my environment, we don't have that. You can't memorize rules or vocabulary to truly understand how things work, and certainly that will get you nowhere into understanding the culture. We need to figure out an entirely new linguistic system. Where is it like the native language? Where is it different, and how? The teacher can help, but this is an internal mental activity. The teacher cannot pour the water into the glass. The teacher can give you the water, but not drink it for you. There are numerous subtleties that we can't even explain, and this new word "like" in English is so unique, I don't even get it fully, but it's hard to explain. We have things we can say, I've been doing that for like ever. How do you explain this? We can't say, I've been doing that for all like ways, always, all like ways. I can't even say it. But, I mean, how do you even explain these things without some sort of immersion? And this is very, very, it's all over in native English, well, certainly in the US and I'm sure Canada and other English-speaking countries. So you can't memorize the words and expect to speak the language. That would be knowledge of language as object. You can just describe it, but you can't use it. And this is why so many language classes are like, at least in the environment that I know, maybe not here, and I hope not here. But one has to question then why that we are not successful. There are too many classrooms where the expectation is that language learning proceeds in a linear fashion. First you learn X, then you learn Y, then you learn Z. Textbooks often present information in a linear order. But what if it's language learning is more like this than this? That is not linear, it's sort of all over the place. What if maybe there's some linearity down at the lower proficiency levels, but the upper proficiency levels are different for everybody, there's just so much space. So what can we do about this situation? We need research on what it takes to reach advanced levels of proficiency, which is what we're trying to do at my university right now. We need to think about our pedagogy, we need to think about our curriculum. The reason reading is so good at most US universities is because it's based on the curriculum. So we took another subsample of students for whom we had, this is not just majors, this was everybody who reached the advanced proficiency level in at least one skill. And the skill that they reached in mostly was reading. That one is reading and listening. And that's speaking, and that's listening. And what we found was, looking at their surveys, is what predicted success mostly was video watching outside of class. The second one was studying abroad. Those were the best opportunities for predicting success. So that was a surprise to us, but it was so predominant in all the surveys. Out-of-class video usage, as I said, was an important predictor of advanced clustering, advanced learners. And these are some of the social media things that they talked about doing, not just video learning, but in social engagement. Language engagement outside of class. Digital media use outside of class. This is often fostered through heritage connections or study abroad experiences. So what we are talking about at our university now is looking at ways to encourage the language programs on finding authentic video resources for students to look at and or connecting learners to speakers of the target language. Advanced language learning can happen in regular university language programs, certainly here in Morocco, I'm sure. And curricular practices infusing the use of social media or video context is one that we are now trying to advocate a bit more. So to make some final comments, language learning is certainly difficult. We need to have reasonable expectations. We may want to think about curricular modifications, such as encouraging or language engagement outside of class, video usage, connection to the host country nationals while abroad, ways to connect to speakers of the language through social media, and finding authentic video sources. Language learning can happen in regular university language programs. So bilingualism, if you want to think about that as a result, or even multilingualism, is an achievable goal. But the task for language educators is to make sure it happens more often, and more frequently. How do we understand language development? I would argue that this is a much more fruitful way to look at the situation, to deliver the multilingualism that we desire and that we need in the world, so that we have a more complete ability to understand not only others' languages, but others' cultures. And this would allow us to imagine a world where language is recognized as important, where language learning has a reasonable chance of succeeding. This is the basis for imagining excellent language educators. And I sum up the problematic expectations with this little cartoon. I don't know if you can read it. No, I can't read it. It's a Peanuts cartoon. Are you smarter this afternoon than you were this morning? Yes, I think I'm a little smarter. But are you a whole lot smarter? No, just a little smarter. See? See what? There are serious flaws in our educational system. Okay. So with that, I thank you. I hope that's right. Yes. I do know how to say merci. I do not know how to say thank you in Berber. I know how to say it in English and French and Shukran.
Thank you, Professor Guess. Your presentation is so rich that it's hard. It's like hard I can summarize it, but I hope students and our guests have got a lot from it. You start. What I can say is that at least we have learned from it that there is more linguistic democracy in Morocco.
Oh.
Because,
and I don't want to paint a totally negative picture. I did want you to understand, as I say, what an uphill battle we have. We have programs, at least in my university, so where the businesses, where the students are going to work, like in engineering, let's say, the businesses want multilingual speakers or speakers with abilities in other languages. They want that because they want them to understand the business culture of another environment. They want them to understand the language of another culture. But when you talk to them about it, and we say, I'm going to make 2 points here. When we say, well, why don't you require that they study another language? They say, oh, we can't do that. They have to take, they're in school for 4 years. They have to take this, and this course in mathematics. They have to take this in education. In engineering. They have to take this in writing, and there's no room for language. The second point I want to make, and that I was trying to illustrate here, is that what a difficult process it is, and a long process to learn a second language. So I was showing you results from after 4 years of language study of majors who can't get to the level where they can even teach in the school. They need more study. So think what it is if you study, if the engineering students were to study 2 years of language. What can they do with it? And I think that's part of the problem that we have, that it's so long, it has to be so sustained that given 2 years or even 4 years, it's not even enough. Because as you saw, we don't have that much study in elementary school or middle school. High school is starting, but not everybody comes with that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Professor Guess. Because we started very late, I'm so sorry we cannot have any discussion. But Professor Guess is still with us for today and for tomorrow. You can have a discussion with her. Thank you very much. I think a few questions. Okay, 4, 5. Let's take some of the questions. Okay. Yes, you are. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Gasson. Very illuminating presentation. In fact, I have 2 questions.
Okay. Are they easy questions? I only take easy questions.
So let's see. Concerning the terminology and the problem that we had in defining certain terms in multilingualism in general, I think that the problem is, in my opinion, it could be from two problems basically. The first one is that whenever we're trying to define a term, we are considering, as you said, not the end product or the end points, but we are considering someone who is still in the process of learning a language. And can I, for example, as a researcher, define the level of the participants in my research, and they are still in the process. So maybe that's why we can't have one definition.
Right. And maybe it's not so important. That I guess what I wanted to point out was that we were sort of sometimes talking past one another. So I've heard terms of bilingualism that you saw the definition that everyone is bilingual. Well, no. I mean, if I can say gracias and I can say shukran, I'm not bilingual. So, I mean, I think we just have to be sensitive, but I don't think there's any problem in our own research, as long as you understand the tradition that you're working within and our own research and defining it. This is what I'm interested in. I would never call anybody studying a second language a bilingual. I would call them a second language learner. But that's my tradition. Another tradition would take that same group of students or learners and to call them bilingual. So
maybe another problem is the lack of methodological rigor, as I think it was Jarvis Scott who said that we lack this in terms of cross-linguistic influence research, but I think we can say that in general in multilingual research we don't have clear rigor in terms of, we don't have rigor in terms of methodologies used, and whenever we use a certain method or methodology in analyzing second language data in general or interlanguage or second language learners, we end up with certain conclusions based on the methodology that we use.
yes, that's absolutely the case. But you know, if you define your terms and I don't have a problem with any of the terms really, as long as we understand what we mean by them and understand that within different literature traditions, we may be talking about the same thing and calling it two different names.
Thank you. A third question. A third question.
Okay. It's just one of the results of your research was a little bit surprising if I got that right. So the video watching was a predictor of learning, success in learning a language, but in reading. Because, for example, in Morocco, we have this, and our learners today, they tend to watch more videos and YouTube videos than reading, but this predicts success in listening and speaking more than in reading.
Yeah, no, what I didn't do, and I don't have the information in my head right now, break it down. Most of it was in reading. You're right. First of all, with YouTube, sometimes I've done a lot of research on captions too and using captions. But the reading comes about, that's a curricular issue because our fourth year students are taking literature courses. There's not much speaking and listening. And so now they're getting the speaking. I think that maybe one of the things that's happening is that they have to go out and get it on their own. And so that's one of the reasons why it may have been predicting success. But we were very surprised by that too.
Yes, you are.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Can I have your name, please?
My name is Ali Alawi.
Ali Alawi?
Ali Alawi. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I think you answered the question, but I wanted to clarify the context that we're dealing with when we say, for example, that there is a democratization in terms of multilingualism. Multilingualism that you described in your presentation is specific to the foreign language education in the United States. And the fact that the focus on the reading, for example, the focus on reading and literature and culture for students gives very different results as what you would expect in other contexts.
Yeah.
And multilingualism in America has absolutely nothing to do with multilingualism in the United States.
Right.
Or in the context of the United States, because the programs that we have in the country are programs that are more educational and target more of like a language requirement, for example.
Yes.
There's one thing that does not exist, that does not have correspondent in Morocco.
So you would have English majors. You would be the corresponding thing in Morocco would probably be students who are studying English to be a major, unless they want to be teachers or.
Right.
I mean, and that's sort of that's the flip side of what we do.
Right. In your presentation, it's clearly something that is specific to foreign language education
Yes.
in the United States.
Right.
And mostly majors who perhaps about school teachers or secondary school teachers or people who would go into teaching foreign languages?
Yeah, that's what the majors do. They are usually teachers, or they go on for their PhDs in literature in the language.
So how would you describe, another question, how would you describe the pedagogical approaches that lead to these discrepancies in outcomes of the programs that you analyze in the school?
How would I do what? How
would you describe
the pedagogy?
The pedagogical approaches, yes.
The ones that I think should be taken, or the ones that are taken?
The ones that led to the results.
There has been some research in foreign language, a lot of research in foreign language classes in the U.S., and what you find, there are two sides to it. One is, the most prevalent, I think, is that the teacher stands up and talks the whole time. There's very little participation on the part of the students. Sometimes the students will even answer in English, but that may not be so common. But what you will find is that the teacher is not engaging the students in any way. They are reading and interpreting the literature that they're Don Quixote or whatever it is that they're reading. So it's really an interpretation and not language use. And what they're getting is the language use probably from outside of the class.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, guest speaker. My name is Brahim, LT supervisor from WSZ. Thank you very much. You defined almost all the concept, except what level of mastery do we need to have as learners of a foreign language before we can venture into teaching it? And this is my message for the students. I visit teachers in the classrooms almost on a weekly basis, and I still see how they suffer. They are still struggling with the language they are supposed to teach. They are wrestling with the pronunciation, the syntax, the grammar. And when they have an observer like me come over to see it, they blush and I see the pain, and because the students don't speak the language. So if you make a mistake, they don't know. Whereas if you have someone like me come over, then you start having butterflies in your stomach. Please get a good mastery of the language before you venture to go to the classroom. Thank you. That's it.
That's your comment, or did you want me to say something?
Only whatever you want. I said, what level of mastery are we supposed to have before we can say, hey, now I can go and teach this language?
Let me just answer that. Well, I don't know if I can answer the question. I don't think there is an answer. I mean, first of all, it's going to be context dependent. So I don't think there's an. We have a specific requirement of, I showed you advanced low in the state of Michigan, but I don't know, I don't think every state has, maybe some states don't even have requirements. So there's no, I don't really have an answer, a definite answer to that. But one of the controversies that I'm sure you've had too, is whether, is it better to be a native speaker to teach the language or not? And from my view, is the pedagogy is equally, if not, I don't want to say more important, as important as the language itself. So plenty of speakers who are not native speakers of a language can teach the language. I actually taught Italian once, many years ago when I was living in Italy. Now, why they hired me instead of a native speaker, I don't know. I didn't have the pedagogy either. I won't even go into that story. It's a very sad story. But I had no pedagogy training. I was in my 20s, and I wasn't a native speaker of Italian. But so I think that there are two things that you have to look at, is the pedagogy and the language. Yes, there does have to be some minimum. I remember my son, one of my children once said he was studying French. And he was just appalled at his teacher's French. He said, I think my French is better than hers. So there has to be a minimum. I'm not going to say what it is, and I wouldn't dare say. But there also has to be the pedagogical training. And the two of them, one can compensate for another. Oh, I know one other thing that I can say. I remember doing a study, this is years ago, we never published it, looking at a Chinese Chinese man who was teaching math, and he won the Outstanding Teaching Award. And his English was not very good, but he wasn't teaching language; he was teaching math. But what he did is he compensated. He compensated by brilliant use of PowerPoints, brilliant use of the chalkboard. So there was some compensation. And I think that the language and the pedagogical training can be seen as some way of overcoming where one is weak in one and stronger in the other. So I think it's a sort of a bifurcation or a double-pronged approach, I should say.
I would like to thank you. Thank you for